Hello and welcome back to the Best for Baby podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Rogers-Sargent, and in case you don't know, I'm a pediatric physiotherapist. I've specialized in working with newborns and infants, and I have worked with these babies for more than 20 years. After working with these babies for so long, I became a mum myself for the first time, and I found out all the things I had thought I knew weren't always exactly true. And this has been the most wonderful change in the way I address the work I do and the way I speak to parents that I work with. So today we are starting a mini-series of podcast episodes that is going to cover all the most common questions I have been asked, the biggest concerns and worries and sometimes panics of myself included, but new parents of little babies. And I hope you find this really helpful because it's all the things I wish I could tell parents before they have a baby or before this thing has happened that could have been prevented. So I really feel strongly about this, about getting this message out. So I hope it's going to be really, really helpful to you. So this mini-series is also going to cover topics that are not covered in your NCT courses, or things that perhaps friends or relatives who have had babies don't think to tell you or maybe didn't know themselves. And of course, things that your healthcare professional may not know or may not have a chance to tell you because there's so much else that gets discussed when you're having a new baby. And the kind of things that you won't find in the preparing for parenthood or what to expect when you're pregnant, when you have a baby, in those kind of books. So this is all kind of the off the beaten track information. Today we're going to start with talking about bathing your baby, particularly your newborn, and really this all kind of will cover in the first year of life. So something that we used to do in the past is as soon as the baby was born, they would be whisked away by nurses and washed for you, and you'd be presented with this beautiful smelling, clean baby all wrapped up. Now, I'm sure you'll be aware of this already, but that's not something we do anymore. And most hospitals will say to you to not bath your baby for at least the first week of life, or at least until the little cord stump has fallen off. What they do instead of bathing the baby is as soon as the baby is born, if the baby is healthy and well, they wipe it gently to remove all the blood and the body fluids, and then they give you your baby immediately without a bath. And there are a number of reasons for this. Firstly, it is because all babies are born with a really thick, waxy coating on their skin. This is called the vernix, and this has a number of functions, but the first most important function possibly is that it acts as an antimicrobial barrier on your baby's skin. And if you wash your baby, particularly with soap, you will wash it away. If you rub your baby really hard and you can scrape it almost off the baby's skin, you lose that antimicrobial barrier. And all that means is it's like a little built-in barrier against germs that would otherwise enter through the baby's skin. So in those early days of life, the vernix acts as a preventer of infection that would have arisen through coming through the baby's skin. That vernix is also, really importantly, a natural moisturizer of the baby's skin. We all know when your skin gets really dry, it can crack, it's uncomfortable, it's not as healthy as a lovely, well-oiled skin made with your own natural oils. And so that vernix will remain on the skin until you remove it, and your baby's skin remains nicely moisturized. And that, again, prevents the cracking, which would open the skin up to infection, but also that dry skin can be uncomfortable, makes the child more prone to rashes and skin irritations and even eczema sometimes. So we really want to leave that natural moisturizer on the baby's skin for as long as possible, because the skin is going to be so much more supple and healthy if we do that. The vernix also acts as a temperature regulator. And babies are born and they don't have great temperature regulation. So particularly when it's really cold, that vernix sort of helps them to regulate their body temperature and can play a role in preventing hypothermia, so the baby getting too cold. So that's another lovely function of the vernix. And finally, that vernix provides a familiar scent, a familiar smell for the baby. Now, a baby, when it is in the womb, there's very little change. That environment in the womb is constant. There's no change in light, going from dark to light, because it's pretty much dark in there all the time. The temperature doesn't change. The feeling of the water, the baby's in amniotic fluid, on their skin doesn't change. The smell is always the same. The taste is always the same inside the womb. And then the baby is born and everything is new and everything is different. And some babies really take a long time to get accustomed to the new sights and sounds and sensations of the outside the womb world. And so to give them anything familiar, this is the same reason why we have all sorts of white noise or things that mimic the mother's heartbeat, because it's familiar and so it's comforting for the baby. And that smell of the vernix is their own smell, so it's very comforting for them. It's something they know and can remember and feel comforted and calmed and soothed by. Now, it's my personal opinion through experience over the years, but I also think the newborn smell, that vernix smell, is very similar to the mother's smell, and that would make sense because that is created inside the mother's body, and there's a similarity in the two smells, the mother and the newborn baby. And that's kind of geared so that when the baby is put down on their own and the mother isn't there, that smell will remind them of their mother, and again, it's a comforting thing. So it's lovely in that it's a comforting, soothing smell for the baby, perhaps of the mother, but certainly their own smell that they were used to before they came out the womb. So for all these reasons, we don't want to remove the vernix. We want to leave it on the baby's skin for as long as possible. The other reason we don't bath them so early anymore is because they have the little cord stump. And if that cord stump gets wet and soggy, it just makes it more prone to infection. So we prefer not to bath the babies until the cord stump has fallen off. Some babies, it might fall off after 5 days, in which case you would like to still not bath your baby, even though they don't have the cord stump on them anymore, because you really want to ideally hit the week mark before you bath your baby, or you can wait longer. Some stumps will fall off after 14 days, 2 weeks. So if you can delay it that long, that would be really, really good for your baby. Another reason we don't want to wash the baby immediately is because when the baby is born, they don't have their own microbiome, all the healthy bacteria in their gut and on their skin. And one of the ways we cultivate those healthy bacteria is on the skin. So if we wash them, we are removing all the healthy bacteria from the blood and the body fluids that the baby has accumulated on them. Even your baby who's had a cesarean section, it's not just your babies that pass through the vaginal canal. They will have all those bodily fluids on them. So we wipe them, we dab them off, and then we leave that. Those bacteria will remain on the baby's body. And the longer they are left there, they can cultivate and multiply, and the baby will start to develop their own diverse microbiome, which will go a long way to the start of developing their immune system and many, many other things, but that's a whole other discussion. So we do want to promote a healthy microbiome by not washing them and washing away all those good germs very early. So what do you do until you're ready to bath the baby? Well, we're just going to wash gently with water the areas that are really soiled, really dirty. So if your baby's vomited all over themselves, or obviously the nappy area that needs to be rinsed and washed. So the important things to think about is you're not going to use wipes with harsh chemicals in them or soap. Really, all you're going to use is water. Now, if you think about it, babies will be in nappies. Some of them come out of nappies around 2 years old, some of them 5 years old. It's a range. But they spend a lot of time in nappies. And in the early days, babies will be pooing 10 times a day, some of them, and then you also weeing and you wiping and washing. And if every time you're using harsh chemicals to wipe and clean their bottom, that's going to have a really strong effect. They're going to be absorbing all of those chemicals through their skin, firstly. But it also has a really strong drying out of that area. And we've just spoken about why it's so important to try and keep it moisturized. Now, there's no way you're going to keep that vernix on the bottom. You're going to be cleaning the bottom so much. We're trying to preserve vernix on the rest of the body. But for the bottom, we don't want to dry it out and use harsh chemicals. So a lovely thing to do is to have a bowl of water at all your changing stations, which you empty out at the end of the day, wash, put a fresh Tupperware or bowl, fresh water at the start of each day. And then you can have a pile of either cotton pads or gauze, or what I had is something called cheeky wipes, and they're really lovely, but there's loads of different washable, reusable wipes that you can use out there. Now the cheeky wipes are lovely. They come in a little box that you can then wet and you moisten and you put essential oils in. I didn't do that. I just kept the dry little flannel cloths, they like flannels but they're small, in a pile at all my changing stations, and you dip that in water. You get it really, really wet and squeeze it out over the baby's bottom. So you've got running water, rinsing off as much as possible. Obviously, if you need to wipe, you will, but you don't rub and scrape hard. It's a gentle patting, gentle washing. Ideally, most of it will come off by squeezing the wipe or the pad. So it's just pure water, rinsing that baby's bottom. You don't have any chemicals, you don't have any scraping and scratching and dryness happening there because you've used harsh chemicals. Once you've done that, you want to keep that little bottom moisturized, so you might put an oil on the bottom. Now, again, for the same reason, we don't want to be using strong moisturizers, even if they say they baby. A lot of these for baby products have got chemicals in them still. And so why not use something that you would eat? Because whatever you put on their skin is going to be absorbed through the skin. So I loved using coconut oil, and every time I changed the nappy, after I'd wiped and patted dry, I put a bit of coconut oil onto the bottom area, and that maintains or replaces that moisture that the vernix would have provided on the bottom, and it keeps the skin smooth and supple. It creates a minor barrier. It's not going to do a lot once it's absorbed into the skin, but if you put quite a lot of it on, it means you can use less barrier cream. Certainly if you're changing your baby's nappy regularly, you're not going to be needing to put barrier cream on the bottom at every single time, because barrier creams are going to have chemicals in them too. And you're going to save that for overnight or when you can't change the nappy really frequently. And the rest of the time you can put an edible oil like a coconut oil or an olive oil. Now that brings me to my point about something that you may have been told in your NCT, or if you haven't done that, you might not have been told about this, but usually first-time parents are warned about the early baby poops or poos, because they can be quite frightening if you haven't been warned about it. Now, the first 2 days roughly of life, the baby is going to pass into their nappy all the contents of the womb. So cells, lunago, which is fine little hairs, the amniotic fluid that they've processed, everything that they've taken in inside the womb is now going to come out. And it's not diluted by milk that the baby's been drinking. So it's a really sticky, thick substance, and it's usually a black color. It can be greenish black even, and it's like tar. And it's great when the baby passes it through. We want them to get it out. But the problem is if it dries particularly, even if it doesn't dry, it's super, super sticky and it gets stuck onto the baby's skin. And to get it off is quite a nightmare once it's dried, which means you start scraping and scrubbing it off the baby's bottom and using harsh soaps and wipes and trying anything to get this terrible stuff off your baby's bottom. So a really lovely piece of advice is when you pack your bag for the hospital, make sure you pack a little jar of olive oil or coconut oil with you. And once your baby is born and you put on that first nappy, put some of this lovely oil on their bottom, and you keep using a lot of oil on the baby's bottom until all that, what we call meconium, which is that thick black substance, has been passed through. And then you will find the poop becomes much looser and it doesn't get so stuck to the bottom. So the first 2 days, as I said, it's mostly just the contents of the womb fluids that is being passed through the baby, and that's why it's this thick, sticky substance. From about day 2, your baby is now drinking either colostrum or milk, if your milk has come through, if you're breastfeeding, or your formula. And that milk is going to start diluting that meconium, and also the meconium is now becoming less and less as it's passed out. And so the texture and the consistency and the color of the baby's poo changes, and it becomes maybe greenish brown, yellowish, brownish, greenish, and it's a lot less sticky. But certainly for the first 4 days of life, there is going to still be meconium in the poo. And so you're going to want to make sure that bottom is nice and oily so that it doesn't get dried and stuck to the bottom, and you're not left with this really difficult task of scraping it off the baby's bottom. So in those early days, as I've said, we're hardly bathing the baby. We're just going to use some water and try and rinse off by squeezing a cotton pad over the baby's bottom, patting away where we need to, just water and a wipe, ideally a dry wipe or a dry cotton pad, nothing with chemicals on it. And we're going to be using a lot of edible oils on our baby's bottom to keep them nicely moisturized. So once that stump has fallen off, or you've hit a week or 2 weeks, now it comes to the real bathing. And a lot of people are afraid of this, and it's understandable because it's still so new to you to have this little baby, and you're still learning to hold them, let alone when they're slippery. So make it easy on yourself, because when it's easy, it's enjoyable, and then it becomes the bonding, wonderful experience that bathing a baby can be. Now, I highly recommend, instead of a baby bath or a baby bath seat, to use a baby float, because this is soft and it's comfortable for your baby, and your baby can lie down and float in the water. I like not something that's inflatable and plastic like a Lilo. You get baby bath floats that are fabric, and they are filled with little beads. And so this gets completely wet through when you're using it. So it's really important to, in between baths, let it dry completely so it doesn't get moldy on the inside. So if you do use one of these bath floats, they usually come with like a little fabric hook on the top, and you can get a suction hook or a sticky hook. You just put that on the bath and hang it so that it can completely dry before the next bath, and then it shouldn't get moldy. Now these are really, really lovely because your baby, as I say, it's not hard like a baby bath. A lot of the baby bath seats later, when the baby's sort of kind of 6 months and you put them in those little ring seats, those are quite hard, and they all have a pommel or a little bar to stop the baby sliding through. Even the early baby bath seats that the baby lies sort of at a semi-reclined position on will have a little pommel that goes between the legs. And it's hard, and I don't think very comfortable for the baby, whereas this is just soft, and they can actually float in the water and feel the buoyancy of the water and be pretty much fully submerged other than the face. So on that note, you will find that the baby's ears are submerged, so you're going to have water going into their ears. Now, if your baby does have a problem with their ears, you might want to check with your doctor before you do this. But for babies who don't have any issues with their ears, just remember, when they are in the womb, they are floating in fluid, in amniotic fluid, and that's in their ears. So their ears are ready to have water in them. Also, this is something you're only going to be doing irregularly, because we're not going to suddenly start bathing our babies regularly. We're going to try and keep it to when it's really necessary, because again, we're trying to stimulate that cultivation of the microbiome and maintain moisturization. So as their skin starts to lubricate itself and create oils, we don't want to be washing them all away. So bathing, we're going to keep it quite irregular and infrequent. So your baby floating on a baby bath with some water in their ears should not be a problem. However, if you are concerned, please do check with a healthcare practitioner. So it's a lovely experience like this, and one of the nicest ways to start is to put your baby floating on their little bath float in the kitchen sink. That way you're not bent over a bath the first time you're trying to do it, and you can have all your things at a good height around you, and you can just gently bath the baby. You're not going to use soap. It's again, you're just using water at this stage. And ideally for the first months of life, unless there's a really strong need to use baby soap, try and just keep bathing your baby only with water. Once you're confident bathing your baby in the kitchen sink like this, you can then transition and start bathing them where they float in the big bath on this little bath float. And they can actually tolerate these bath floats if your baby enjoys it for a really long time. I had a really tall baby. She was very, very long, still is. And she was able to use that bath float for the first year of life. And certainly most babies will probably use them for like 8 months, and that will go beyond the stage of sitting. Now, babies, as we know, when you put them in a bath, it's slippery. Even if they are sitting really well on the ground, they may slip, and it is good then to probably just pop a non-slip mat in the bath when your baby starts to sit. But it's better, my personal feelings are that it's better to let your baby float until they're such a competent sitter that they've been sitting for quite some time on the ground that you can then just put your non-slip mat in the bath without having to have a bath seat, one of those hard, rigid plastic seats in the bath in between. You can just not need that. Because those bath seats, as a baby is learning to sit, they're still going to slip and slide, and they're quite hard for a baby to slip forward and that hard plastic pole to kind of hit them between the legs. So for me, I prefer to let my baby float on her back. And yes, that is not challenging her sitting balance, but bath time isn't about promoting your gross motor development. You should be doing that throughout the day and giving your baby lots of opportunity to move and to sit and to do all these things. The bath should be about enjoyment, floating, getting clean. And for me, I like to lie in the bath, and I don't see any problem with allowing your baby to just float and enjoy that time without having to work on their balance and sit up in the bath. So even if it is way beyond the time that they're able to sit up on their own, it's quite nice to let them float in the bath and then go straight on to putting a non-slip mat in the bath rather than having to use a bath chair in between. And with this, as soon as you are confident in letting your baby float, you've tried it, you're good at this, and your baby's enjoying bath time in the bath, you can, if there's enough space, then get in with your baby, and the float is between your ankles, between your legs, and you can bath with your baby, which is just a really lovely experience because you're not having to sit up over them and make sure that they're not slipping and falling out of a bath seat. This way they're just floating and having a lovely time in the bath with you. What I do want to mention with that is that if you have had a cesarean section, you shouldn't be bathing for the first 6 weeks after your surgery, after your C-section, because it's a really, really deep cut. They cut through all those layers of muscle, and it takes a full 6 weeks to heal. And if you climb into the bath in those, before the 6 weeks, before it's fully healed, you may introduce an infection, which can become a really deep infection. And it can be really dangerous for you. So nobody gave me that piece of information. And it's just because in the early days in the hospital after you've had your baby, there is so much to worry about, so much to look after. You have changeover of staff. So very often a lot of these things will be missed, and they don't tell you this. And I certainly wasn't, and perhaps I should have known this myself anyway. But I got a terrible infection because it's so lovely to think about climbing in the bath with your new baby. And I did that, and I did get an infection and needed antibiotics. So please learn from my experience and don't make the same mistake. So those are my biggest points for bathing your baby. And certainly in the first year of life, you shouldn't need to be bathing them regularly. So this is something that you don't have to do every day. Even some people would say twice a week, but I'll leave that up to you to decide how often you are going to bath your baby. But please remember, don't use soap, don't use harsh chemicals, don't use moisturizers on your baby's skin when your baby's very little, because they usually have very strong fragrances in them or chemicals. And again, they're going to absorb all of those chemicals, but also it's going to mask their own baby smell that is comforting for them. And if you can imagine, sitting next to someone who's just sprayed a lot of perfume on themselves, particularly if it's a perfume you don't like, and you imagine you can't get away from them. You have to sit next to them and smell this the whole time. It can be really overwhelming and uncomfortable for you. So with putting a strong moisturizer on your baby, they've got to now lie in the smell that is foreign to them and very, very strong. So rather use, again, an edible oil where the smell isn't quite so strong and will become something the baby can become used to. Now, a lot of people would say, well, bath time is part of the bedtime routine. And yes, I understand that. However, your bath time, a lot of people end up doing a bath time and then it's milk and feed and a number of other steps after the bath before they go into bedtime. So it can certainly be added infrequently, not every day, to your bedtime routine. It doesn't have to be a major part of the bedtime routine, and you can find that you can still have a really effective regular bedtime routine without having to include a bath into it. So I hope that is helpful, and I look forward to continuing this mini-series about all the things that I wish I could tell all the parents out there before they have a baby. And I wish you all the very, very best, and most of all the best for your baby.